We're live. Hi, this is Jeff. I'm back streaming again after a short little break for Mental Health Month. And I'm here with Mert today. And we're going to talk about who knows what. We've been having a lot of kind of deep, intense conversations lately. So we wanted to capture some of it on stream. Mert, if you want, you can tell us a little bit about yourself and give us some background, and then we can launch into whatever topic you want to talk about.
Yeah, sure, Jeff. So my name is Mert, and I'm a philosopher, and that's all I really would say about myself. I'm also an artist as well, but
Oh,
yeah,
cool. What kind of
yeah.
art do you do?
Oh, well, I really focus on the essence rather than the forms of art. Um, regarding the forms, I would say I lean towards poetry and writing as well, and playwriting and such. So all sorts of writing.
Oh, wow.
Um, yeah, but it's really the essence that I am.
Do you have a website or a blog or anything?
Oh, no, I don't. I was playing around with some Instagram stuff, but um, currently I don't. But I'm planning to publish a book soon. But yeah,
Oh, awesome.
yeah,
Cool.
yeah.
Well,
It's
what's on
really
your
a way
mind
for
today?
me to express emotions and such.
That helps you.
Mm, yeah.
Well, we were talking about logic and emotion the other day.
Mm,
So I'm glad that you have an outlet for that emotional side.
yeah. Right. Right.
Do you oh, Dobez is here. He says riding, indeed, such a wonderful hobby. Good morning, or whatever. I guess it's not morning there. Dobez,
Mm.
hi, good to see you.
Good morning, Bob.
So what do you want to start out with? You,
Yeah. So I have this argument, which is that genes have personality, which caused evolution to happen in its linearity. And the argument goes like this. So evolutionary scientists often say that species X, so let's take humans, developed feature X, so let's take hair, right? And due to protection from event X, so let's take cold. And what this means is that it's essentially means that um, evolutionary scientists attribute a linearity to evolution, basically, and this is due to the fact that it presupposes that evolution presupposes that the um that what it aims to protect the species from exists, so the pre-existence of that, and also the post-existence of that. So it aims to that's the aim, right? That's what the aim is. It's for the post-existence of that, because of the mere fact that its aim is to protect the species from that future event from happening, such as cold in this case, as we discussed. And so what this means is that linearity presupposes personality, so the genes.
when you
And
say personality, you mean like a consciousness or an intelligence?
right, so I don't think that personality presupposes consciousness or free will. I think that, or sorry, I think that to clarify, what personality presupposes is a will to achieve an aim. So I think that um, aims include personality. So let me extend on that, right? So I believe that essentially a personality is a single entity that has the proclivity towards a certain specific pattern of behavior. And that pattern of behavior could be internal or external, by the way. So it could be internalized patterns of behavior or externalized patterns of behavior. And what that means is that personality doesn't presuppose free will or free choice. It just presupposes a will towards a an aim, essentially, so an accomplishment. Um and if we take this to next level, by the way, that what this means is that so a personality is a set of personalities, which is a set of personalities as well, and it's multi-layered, right? And each personality is a single entity. So you could think of this as a mini human being, stripped
That's
of.
what's throwing me off because we're talking about at the genetic level, so it's hard to
Hmm.
picture miniature human beings
Yeah.
in the gene. Is this a metaphysical entity, or
So
can it be strictly
it's
material?
it's a metaphysical and possibly strictly material entity, I think, right? Because here's how I think about it, right? So these single entities that are personalities that have the proclivity for a certain pattern of behavior, as I just said, is single. So you can that's why I said you can think of them, right, as miniature human beings where they're stripped. So because we have far more personalities, because we're far bigger than those miniature sets, but but they still have a set of personalities within them, right? So it's rather stripped versions of us. So um that's how I think of them, where because they have an aim, right? And so if you want to lie, let's say, that's a mini person within you, a mini person, right? But not in the literal sense, but it's a good way of looking at it.
Is it like the
So
angel and the devil on the shoulder, the
yeah, kind of. But
parts of
even
ourself?
I think that even though I think that even those are personalities within. So I think that those two angel and the devil are two personalities, but they also have a set of personalities within them, right? So they have different proclivities, therefore, towards different patterns of behavior. But what this does mean then, though, is that even though personality doesn't presuppose free will, it still presupposes um personality to it, essentially, right. So it presupposes therefore some level of consciousness, but consciousness doesn't presuppose free will. It just presupposes this Freudian type ego, essentially, right? And being subject to these proclivities, to these patterns of behavior, if that makes sense.
Well, the thing that's throwing me off to begin
Mhm.
with is not even that part. It's the understanding of evolution as in intent, and this is where I'm trying to practice intellectual
Mhm.
humility. And evolution is one area where I get to do
Yeah.
that because I can safely say I know very little about evolution
Mhm.
and how it works, much much less than I should.
Yeah.
And but my understanding of it is it's random and it's the genes or the organisms just
Mhm.
interacting and it with in their environment, and then the successful adaptations to the environment
Yeah.
survive. And
See,
so I don't know
you
that
said
there's
successful.
intent or that it's foreseeing future circumstances. It's just the remnants of what's currently survived the particular environments.
So you use the word successful, and successful presupposes an order to it, and that's my point,
Or
right?
that they
That's
just didn't
linearity.
die.
Hmm?
That they just didn't die. That's what I mean by
So,
successful.
so, but there's still that linearity then, right? Where when we say
I,
successful, like if we say good genes, for example, where this funny case where um a man sees a beautiful looking woman, and then he tells his friend, "Oh, this woman's got good genes," right? What does good genes really mean? It means good because genes that allow that
you're gonna make
maximize
good babies.
that maximize the will to reproduction as well, right? Where and what does reproduction mean in a big sense? You survive in some sense. You don't literally survive and you die, right? But through your kids you can survive. So it's still a mechanism for survival, right? It's still and that's the fundamental goal of evolution, right? And that's what I mean by linearity, where that's why I
I'm
think that
not
it
sure
presupposes
evolution has a
linearity
goal. That's what's
to
throwing
it.
me. It's just
Hmm.
I understand it's just a process.
I think it's the genes that have a goal, right? Where I think that the genes, because I think that when I think that when animals are reproduced, right, and they have, let's say, successful genes, and then and they also have failed genes, right, where they and the fundamental dictate for quote unquote failed genes is genes that don't survive uh situation X, right? And the rule for successful genes is, well, genes that survive, right? Genes that can successfully reproduce itself due to not dying. And so what that means is, for me, right, it's not evolution that's linear, right? When I say evolution, rather to kind of enhance my perspective on this a bit as I'm speaking, what I mean is linearity to the movement of the genes that create evolution, essentially. That makes sense.
Like when you say linearity, you just mean movement through time?
Linearity as in movement with an aim. Because
I think it's the aim part I'm getting caught up on.
there is this presupposition that evolution is completely random. But when I say aim, the aim is fundamentally for survival of future events right, those future events that can happen, and that
But
survival could be through reproduction. So it could be sexual aspects of, let's say, evolutionary sexuality. It could be other things. It could be hair, as we said, right? And that's the fundamental aim of evolution, I believe, right? That's why I say aim, because I
to
think that
pass on the genes, I think could survival be like a side effect of?
I mean, passing genes, I think, is still survival. Does
I
that?
do know that organisms have an instinct to
Mhm.
pass on their genes, to perpetuate their genes,
But
if
I
that's what
think
you
that's
meant
still
by intent.
survival, right? Where, because when you pass your genes, you pass yourself. So if you so when people reproduce, right, they actually reproduce themselves. They don't reproduce people other than themselves. So when two people reproduce, right, they both reproduce themselves, both of them, in some real sense. Where, because I think that it's a mistake to view sexual um activity as differentiated from reproducing yourself. I think that you don't reproduce someone different from you do, but you don't on the biological level, right? You still reproduce to a great degree yourself, I think. Both
Well,
partners.
I have a question, but Dobes has a comment too. I want to address.
And
My
that's what I mean
question
by
is
survival.
what led you, like, what put you on the track of this genes as personality
Oh, our
line of
conversation.
thinking in the first place? But Dobes says if this is a fractal system, we're
Mhm.
made up of many personalities. Let's say Freud's drifts, and each of those are made up of personalities. If a gene
Yeah.
has multiple personalities, then what is the deepest personality, the fundamental building block of it all?
See, I don't know, because I actually asked you this. I remember during our conversation. By the way, you said what made you think this. I would say our conversation.
I thought you had been thinking about this for a while, though, before our
I mean, I
conversation.
before our conversation, I had been thinking of a theory, and the theory and our conversation kind of maybe went together, I
Oh,
suppose. But I don't know. But I had actually been thinking of evolution before a bit, but our conversation, I think, really enunciated that idea, I suppose, because I think that the idea was on a subconscious level, possibly. I mean, listen, I was playing around with the idea at the time of our conversation, and the idea was that, okay, so the idea was that you have, so I was looking into the ego and the the body. So whether those two are fundamentally separated or whether they're one.
Well, Freud says that the ego is a bodily ego.
Mm?
The ego is always a bodily ego, so I don't even know how separated they are.
I came to the conclusion that the ego it's the level of consciousness, and what I mean by that is it's it's how you perceive the world and what you perceive within the world, which is based on the set of mental objects at the time. It was this set of mental objects, right? And the mental objects influence the perception, and the perception influences the mental objects. It's a reciprocal relationship that they have. And after our conversation, wait, sorry, actually, let me extend the theory just a bit. So now at the time, I also came to the conclusion that those mental objects that create the perception is the ego, and it's the level of consciousness, which is the ego. But anyways, and the perception which impacts the mental objects. I said that those mental objects, right? So they go beyond consciousness. So there's around consciousness, which is around perception, and then there is beyond consciousness, right? So when it's beyond consciousness, it's either, you could think of it as in thin air, but it's not. But you could think of it like that.
Think of
right?
it as what?
As in thin air, but it's not literally like that, right? But you could think of it like that. So it's either in thin air or it's in someone else's perception. So it answers those mental objects answer the perception, right? As I said, the perception influences those mental objects, and then they go beyond the mental objects. Okay, and if it enters someone's perception and gets influenced by it and goes back out into the collective mental landscape, where there's other mental then there's other perceptions, let's say, right? So other people, they can, when if another person takes that idea from the collective, I say, because that idea has been now influenced by someone, and then that person influences it as well, and there's this kind of collective influencing as well.
Intersubjective exchange.
And after our discussion, I came to the conclusion that rather it's personalities that, so these mental objects, right? If you go deeper, these mental objects there are personalities within you that take these mental objects, and also the mental objects take the personalities. So they move one another as well, if you go a bit deeper.
So our perception is not unitary. It's like a what I want to say, a composite of many different loci of perception within us, that like each one's a personality, and what we perceive as perception is just a composite of that.
So I think that you, quote unquote, our perception, right? That's the you part. That's why I say my body, right? I say I feel this way, or I think this way, right? But I think that you don't think this way and you don't feel this way, because it's simply that there are personalities around the you, and a personality is a set of personalities, which is a set of personalities, and again, it's multi-layered, and they interact with one another, kind of talk, and their voice comes up. You could think about it this way: their voice comes up to you, and that creates the perception, essentially, which is you, right? That's kind of the thing that's perceiving things, right? And the thing that's getting perceived is created by the personalities interaction. So what you perceive is the result of the interaction of personalities. That's my thesis for that.
Okay, I think I kind of get it. I don't necessarily disagree with all of Dolbez is cracking me up. He said Freud's ego and
Hmm?
Jung's ego are very different. Mert's explanation seems more like Jung's view of the ego. To Freud, the ego is more of a regulatory thing. It
Hmm?
negotiates between the superego, cultural views, morals, and the id.
Yeah.
Your drifts, drives like hunger, lust, anxiety, etc. And I will mention that Freud revised his concept of the ego
Hmm?
as his career progressed. So he didn't have just a single conception of it. So he's saying that your view of the ego sounds more like Jung's.
Well, you mentioned the superego. I think that superego is also a personality, which has its own set of personalities, right? I think that the fundamental flaw in stating the id and the superego is that though it's like saying those two are also our fundamental personalities, right? But I think that they're not fundamental personalities. There's it's a part it's an aspect of a personality. So it's a personality within a personality, right? It I suppose those multi-layered set up. So I suppose those multi-layered set of personalities go more minute and minute and minute and minute within each personality until it disappears or until it cannot no longer go smaller.
What does it
For example,
disappear into? Like, where does it come from and what does it disappear into if it's an actual entity, like you say?
I think that it simply doesn't exist when it's at a point where it cannot become smaller. So you can think of it like strip, like you know those things where it's red, these red little not statues, but
The Russian dolls,
yeah, you
Matryoshka
know,
dolls,
like that, where it you can strip them until it goes no, it
until
can
there's nothing.
until it can go no smaller.
I
That's
think
the
we're on the problem of consciousness. What is consciousness? Where does it originate?
Hmm. I think that, well, I see. I don't have a strong opinion for that, but
Take care, Dobes. Good to see you. He says he
is there anybody?
disagrees with you, but he likes your explanations and conversations. Keep
Hmm?
on. He said he disagrees with you, but he likes
Hmm.
your explanations and your conversations. So keep on and have a nice day.
Oh, thank you, man. I appreciate that.
It sounds like we're trying to figure out what consciousness is.
Hmm. I see. I think that consciousness is simply what you perceive, or rather, the thing that perceives what you the sorry that was a bad sentence. Let me let me make it better. um, because man, the thing that perceives what you okay, right. So I think that it's the thing that perceives what is essentially, right? So I think that that thing that consciousness perceives is dictated by the interaction between personalities and the sets of personality and etc etc etc. um but I think that consciousness, I think that free will may be differentiated from consciousness. See, I mean, before I thought that consciousness presupposed free will, but you might be conscious, right? You might be a zombie as well.
Well,
You might be
I
a
tend to
zombie.
believe in free will
Mm.
because I feel like I have direct experience in using it. Someone brought up on Twitter today. It was a tweet about how we think we have, like, we can't control our thoughts or our emotions, but we think that we can,
Yeah,
and that gives us the illusion of free will. But I spent many years learning how to manage and direct my thoughts and emotions through the mental health work I do. So I definitely have direct experience of the illusion that I'm exercising some kind of agency over
yeah.
my internal objects of consciousness, as you put it.
I want to comment on that, but can I just quickly go to the bathroom first, if you don't
Oh
mind?
yeah, I will do
Thanks, man.
intermission.
Thanks, man.
I'll try to entertain them while you're gone.
Okay.
So, and I guess I'll continue with that. Also, there's a learning process, like that ability to manage and direct the contents of my thought and feeling was learned and developed gradually over time. So, if there's no free will, how is learning possible? How is growth possible? How is directed growth or directed development possible? How can you learn? How can you acquire this cumulative progressive ability to gradually direct your inner experience if we're just passively at the mercy of whatever forces are overdetermining us? Where does the ability to learn and grow come from, and at some point gain mastery of the things that we're supposedly at the mercy of? So my whole experience, my intuition, everything related to the concept of free will runs contrary to the belief that we don't have any. And it could just be a linguistic or conceptual problem. Like, I don't know that it has practical implications. It just may be how we're framing the problem in the first place, and dividing it into either having free will or not having free will. I think there's a process. Consciousness is involved. There's in some sort of process, and through that we can become aware and direct and grow and change. I'm also thinking of Schopenhauer's will when he's talking about the like the will within genes and all of life and every living organism. The world is will and representation. I'm also like the mental objects too reminds me of the representation aspect. So I need to find out if he's read Schopenhauer. Schopenhauer was a German philosopher. I was thinking about Schopenhauer because that's what all this is reminding me of. The world is will and representation. Have you read Schopenhauer?
No, but I'm a bit familiar with his stuff, just a bit. I mean, I know. I don't know if I'm. Well, I hope I represent his thought correctly, but I think that his theory that he proposed was there is the will to survive, which causes not survive, the will to stay, kind of like to. I like using the word survive, right? But it's not precisely that. But there's the metaphorical meaning behind what I'm saying here. So when I say survive, what I mean is
kind of the will stay. To persist, maybe.
Yeah, and stay and not fall apart, right? And he said that will to life essentially is the fundamental reasoning behind suffering. Am I representing that idea correctly?
I know he was a pessimist. I'm not sure how it's connected to suffering, but he also had the concept of our mental reality being like the world being a mental representation of the actual world, which is the mental objects and perception that you were talking about. We could even do a book club on it one day if you want.
Yeah. I'd love to do that. Yeah.
By the way, I guess I should mention, you have a channel you're starting as well, a philosophy channel.
Yeah, so I am. So it's called the channel's called A Philosopher's Chimes, and me and Jeff will be doing regular podcasts there as well, right? And I will also be doing like videos where I talk kind of like video essays over there. So if you like Jeff, for me, maybe go and subscribe.
And we were brainstorming activities for the channel, and one thing we came up with is book clubs and having discussions around philosophical topics and maybe incorporating them into the channel too. So maybe a Schopenhauer book club. There's also I've run into a few people that are wanting to read Nietzsche, and so maybe a Nietzsche book club who was influenced by Schopenhauer, as was Freud.
Right. Yeah. So. Yeah. So as as Jeff said, right? Yeah. So so it's gonna be a big part. So it's gonna be a big part of this channel as well. So we're gonna be creating book clubs together as well and all of that stuff.
So be
So
like a
that's what
little
it's gonna be about.
community as well.
Yeah.
Like, so if
Mhm.
you're interested in philosophy or anything philosophical and you want to get involved, just contact us.
Mm. There's gonna be an episode called. So there's gonna be actually a series as well. I don't know if I should be saying it before because it's a long time away, but it's the metaphysics of Jordan Peterson. So that's the whole. It's gonna be a series. Um. So
On
it's
the 12 rules, right?
12 rules are part of it, but the whole series is gonna have 12 rules for life and antidote to chaos. It's gonna have beyond order, so 12 more rules for life beyond order. It's gonna have the metaphysics of maps of meaning. It's gonna have the metaphysics of the whole biblical, his perspective, his Christian metaphysics, we could say. Well, not when I say Christian metaphysics, what I mean is his metaphysics relating to Christianity. And it's going to be a whole big series on the metaphysics of Jordan Peterson. But the reason why that's coming a big way is, let me actually, the the reason why it's a long way away is because I just finished reading this book and now I'm studying this book. So it's still
So I
work in
guess I might
progress.
have to actually read a Jordan Peterson book for once in my life.
Oh yeah, 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 yeah. I mean, listen, it'd be great if you also like study the book and join the video and we could do it together.
Okay. Well, I'll read
Yeah,
a
yeah.
Jordan Peterson book if you read a Northrop Frye book, who was kind of his predecessor at the
Okay, sure,
University
yeah.
of Toronto.
Yeah, 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 yeah. He's got some interesting stuff on the symbolic world, right?
The what?
On the symbolic landscape or like
Yeah,
books.
archetype, and archetypal criticism.
Hmm,
I find him I prefer him to Jung or Peterson or even Joseph Campbell because he studies them within literature where I can see them
mhm.
in very concrete ways. I don't have to entertain the concept of a collective unconscious, or
Yep.
I can just see them as they play out in art.
Which book do you recommend from Northrop Frye?
His first one was Fearful Symmetry, which I have some people that already want to do a book club on that. So that would be a good one to start with. It's a study of William Blake, but it's a study of William Blake as an example of what he calls the poetic process, which is this mythological thinking that Jung talks about, that Joseph Campbell talks about, that Jordan Peterson
Yep.
talks about. So it takes a single poet and uses him to illustrate what it means to think mythologically and holistically rather than simply just rationally, which is some other things we
Hmm.
were talking about. And then Anatomy of Criticism was his next book, which I also recommend. That's his full scale study of archetypes. It's kind of a
Huh.
system wide study of archetypes from the beginning of cultural history to what was written after World War II, so up to the 50s.
Sure, yeah, yeah, okay. Okay, I'll read that book then, yeah.
Cool. I'm excited. Book it's to 3 or 4 book clubs already. Cool.
So,
So, I
yeah.
guess getting back to consciousness, or I don't remember where we left off when you stepped away, but
Yeah, so I was just saying that I think that consciousness is the thing that perceives perception essentially, right? So and perception is the result of the interaction between the personalities. And you could also think of like for
what
example,
leads you to posit personalities? Like that
because
seems to just be arbitrary and coming out of nowhere. So where do you what leads you to the concept that there's
yeah,
all of these sub personalities?
so I think that like I said, right, personality is a single entity or a miniature human with the proclivity towards a pattern of behavior. And I think that this is fundamentally why we're composed of personalities. Because when we act a certain way, so if I act out a lie, where is that coming from? Or if I have a thought, where is that coming from? Right? Because we always question ourselves. Sometimes have thoughts coming. and we don't exactly know where it came from.
Like, yeah.
And right, and I think that points to that single entity's proclivity, right? Because it seems like it like there's all this discussion within us, and it
Mhm.
seems like there's this, because you could have also said, you could have said anything, right? You think about 40,000 thoughts a day or 50,000. I don't remember the.
At least.
And they're all, why so many thoughts, right? So that's why it seems that there are different entities within you fighting, because if you can have 50,000 thoughts in a day, then how many thoughts is it even possible to have? And if you have 50,000 thoughts every day for 100 years, that shows a lot. And well, you repeat most of the thoughts, but there's still a lot of original ones that you haven't thought of. So it's like, how many thoughts are possible?
So is each thought originating from a separate personality, or I guess there's patterns to the thought. There's differentiation between the thoughts. There's contrast between thoughts, so that gives the uh, illusion or possibility, I guess, that there could be different aspects to us generating different types of thoughts. I can kind of see that way of thinking.
So it's like,
But how granular do you get with these personalities? And like, is every thought you have coming from a separate personality or entity, or are there, like, even superego, ego, id are three aspects of the
yeah,
self, which would be larger. That would be the whole of which the three are parts, and the full self or consciousness would be the fully integrated.
I
Um,
think that your pattern of behavior, whether enunciated onto the external world or enunciated within, so internally enunciated, is the result of either the interaction of patterns, sorry, the interaction of personalities, right? Or a single entity's proclivity towards a certain behavior. So before, I remember saying that your perception is also the result of the interaction within between personalities, right? But I think it could also be the proclivities of your personalities towards the patterns of behavior. And you said something. You said that personalities can be developed, maybe, and I think that does point to that, because our patterns of behavior copy other people's patterns of behavior. I mean, Jonathan Peugeot speaks about this, right? I
mimesis.
love Jonathan Peugeot's stuff. He talks about the patterns found within biblical stories and such, and we copy those patterns. Why do we copy those
All
patterns?
stories. I mean, the biblical pattern is the dominant in our Western culture, but I'd say there are many mythological stories that would apply to.
Like, for yes, but I think it's good to speak about this biblically, because I think it's a well-known phenomena. And a good example would be, for example, the I believe it was, okay. So okay, here's an idea, right? There's this. It's called the Matthew principle, which is the more you behave a certain way, the more of that. The Okay, so let me place this in a better frame. The more good you act, the easier it becomes, essentially, and the worse you get, the harder it becomes to reach your aim. So the richer you are, the easier it is, essentially, to get richer. And the poorer you are, the harder it is to stand up, essentially, right? That's the
Oh
idea.
yeah, I know that.
Hmm. And that's a pattern of behavior which we, I think, know of, for example, because in for example, if you look at hustle culture, that's a manifestation of that principle, I think.
If you look at what?
If you look at hustle culture, where there's this idea of hustle, 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 hustle,
Oh
work,
yeah.
work, work, right? I think it's a manifestation of the Matthew principle, where it's unconsciously in us is enunciating itself right now. For example, through this linear culture, let's say. Because Jordan Peterson talked about this idea where he said the more you suppress um, cultural differences in gender, the more the biological differences come out. So you could think about it the same way, right? The more you suppress these patterns of behavior embedded within the biblical stories and the mythological stories, the more they will come out. Because
Oh,
I
hey,
think it's
John. John stopped
biological.
by. Sorry.
John, I didn't.
Hey, John. Okay,
So
but
I
the
think
more
that
you
those
suppress
patterns
the
are embedded within us biologically, and which is why it's embedded within the mythological landscape. I mean,
well,
um,
they're
yeah.
embedded in the literature, and
Mm.
they resonate with us, perhaps for biological reasons, or perhaps for cultural reasons. I mean, they've been with us for thousands of years by now.
I'm not. I think it's biological because if you look at the Scandinavian, okay, so the Scandinavian study goes like this. Uh, so there's been equality, let's say, right, where the cultural differences have been taken out, but because of that, the biological differences went up.
How do the cultural differences get taken off? It's very hard. We're talking nature nurture, so it's very hard to draw that line. I don't think any of us can ever be
So,
fully nurture free. So how do they get taken off?
so I think that um, I'm gonna use the biblical example where the biblical patterns have been there has been a cultural attempt to take out the biblical patterns of culture and
Can you give an example
of
of?
Western culture. And a good example is, for example, um, responsibility. Is it is a good one. Um, Knowledge suppression of our imperfection
I think of
happens.
those as
So
values, like certain cultural values, but I don't necessarily connect them to any particular stories.
I think that they're okay. So there's this. Okay, so I think that they are embedded within the stories because, for example, to talk with God within the Bible, right? That requires humbleness to follow Him. Like in the Bible stories, you see these people scared,
Yeah, he's a
uh,
scary guy. Yahweh.
as in as in scared because they think that they will mess up, and then God tells them, no, 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 listen, I chose you, right? And that's the main idea. I'm not giving a specific example, but that's the main idea. And so there's this humble attitude to the characters. And I think that humbleness is the precursor to self improvement. It is the precursor to not just self improvement, but responsibility, therefore. So it is the precursor to responsibility, which is the precursor to self improvement. And um, so that's one example, I think, where
Is this from Jordan Peterson?
I which part?
The humility being the precursor to responsibility, being
No,
the precursor to self improvement.
no, uh, but as I was studying his book, what I realized was that if you look at the first rule, stand up straight with your shoulders back, and on
Ooh,
the first rule,
I
he
never do that one.
discusses the and on the first rule, he discusses the symbolic relevance to it, which is standing up to being, saying, "Listen, I will confront you." So in his words, he says confronting being, right? That's the symbolic reality
But
to standing
I
up
do all
straight.
that without standing up with my shoulder. Like,
But but he gives an example of where lobsters have are essentially release serotonin when they stand up. Well, that's the I don't know how accurate that is, but that I'm representing. But I'm not a biologist, um, but
I'm intimidating enough.
so so that is the so that I realize is the actually the precursor to all the rules in there, because all of them is do this, do that, do that, do that, right? But um, and then another thing though that I realized was that all of these rules require humbleness. Where so there are three rules there. Um, there's one that says assume that the person you're speaking to knows something that you don't know. There's that rule, which you need to do when you're reading this book, right? To maximize how much you get. So that's one thing that one kind of humbleness. Another kind of humbleness is tell the truth, or at least don't lie. That's another kind. And the final one is treat yourself like someone you are responsible for helping. And those I think that those three rules are the fundamental rules for all the other rules, right? That's the kind of humbleness I'm talking about. So that's what I realized I was studying that those rules where it's not his words, right? What I'm saying, but his study of his book definitely did help me come to that conclusion that humbleness is the precursor to responsibility, which is the precursor to self-development, which is the precursor to meaning, because meaning is self-development. And in
Is
Jordan's
that the
word,
book
meaning
we're
takes
gonna?
us to Garden
Is
of
that the?
Eden.
Is that the book we're gonna be reading?
Oh, for a part of the metaphysics of Jordan Peterson, yeah, yeah.
I hate rules. That's probably why I haven't read it.
I mean, why do you hate rules?
I just do. I like to figure things because each situation's different. I like to confront a situation and figure it out in the moment. Rules don't
Right. So
really help me with that.
there's
I
there's an
need the
opposing
flexibility that comes with creative freedom.
there's an opposing argument for that in the book, where in the preface or introduction or preface, yeah, preface, let's say. So this is not Jordan Peterson speaking. This is his friend. So his friend states that rules might seem so universal rules might seem essentially useless in some sense, because for example, neuroplasticity, where your minds are our minds are developed according to the situation, and each situation differs, right? So is that your argument, right? If I'm
They just seem
there,
arbitrary and contingent on circumstances. Like it's hard
so
for me to abstract anything universal from experience because it's so diverse.
so on the preface, right? The argument though is that even though our brains develop differently because of our different situations, the book unites all of us through the fundamental thesis that we all have to confront chaos and turn it into order, which is why it's called an antidote to chaos,
I
by the
like
way.
chaos.
But rather, it's the type of chaos that that you want to deal with, essentially, in the not in the artistic sense, but rather, for example, Jordan describes a very personal experience where his daughter had Mikhaila had been very sick when she was little, and that's the kind of chaos right there that we're dealing with. Like,
And so the rules help with that. I'm kind of a
like,
Discordian when it comes to order and chaos anyway. But
there's
I
a very
will read the
interesting
book. I'll commit to reading the book.
there's a very interesting sentence in there. He says that in these kinds of situations, personality is the only thing that you can depend on, and so personality is, and in this sense, but he's using personality in a different sense than I used before.
But
Um,
is that one of the inspirations for your concept of personality?
Probably. I mean, Jordan is a great influence to me, man.
I have two questions.
Yeah.
If personality is the only, what did you just say? Like the only reliable
So his sentence, precise sentence was, in situations of chaos, like for example, being sick, or having your innocent daughter be sick like that, is the only thing that you can depend on at those situations is personality that you developed. And he states that um that that you should build the ark before the flood comes, in his words as
It
well.
depends on what kind of chaos, John. I'm skeptical of too much anything, or having any. Two is relative. If it's the right kind of chaos, like Mardi Gras, you can never have too much of that, in my opinion. So here's my question: if
Yeah.
personality is the only thing in the face of chaos, then why do you need rules? Why can't you just use personality, like default to that instead of a bunch of rules? And my second question is: do cats have personalities? Like, do they have 200
So
different personalities in them, perceiving and thinking and making decisions, or are they more unitary? Is that a human thing?
so from my understanding, Jeff, the rules help develop that personality before the flood comes. That's the main idea.
So the rule, it's not the rules for the sake of rules. It's rules for the sake of developing the
Hmm.
autonomy of your own authentic personality.
Right. Like for example, let me actually um so if you go to chapter one
I'm gonna
on
have
the
to get the book.
preface.
I'm pulling it up right now on Amazon. I think I have
So
a gift card.
if you go to chapter one on the preface, I'm just gonna read the quote. It says when says, given that our brains are plastic and all develop differently based on our life experiences, why even expect that a few rules might be helpful to us all? That's on the first page of the preface. Sorry, by chapter, that's what I meant. Those are wrong words to use, but um, anyways. And then um, if you go to XIV on the preface, then you reach the quote that says, no matter how different our genes or life experiences may be, or how differently our plastic brains are wired by our experiences, we all have to deal with the unknown, and we all attempt to move from chaos to order. So that's the fundamental uniting. It's like, you think of it like a foundation, right? There's a this is a foundation for our neuroplasticity, because it's not arbitrary. Just like evolution, there's this foundation to it.
I know
It
that
isn't.
our brains take in a chaos, like this onslaught, this chaotic onslaught of data, like every second, and it's organizing it automatically into some form of, usually a form of a story or narrative or image or picture that we can grasp with our limited human
Yeah.
consciousness. But so that's kind of an automatic process that the brain just does. Is this an extension of that, where you start to develop and determine what form that organization takes in anticipation of future experiences?
So in this case, right, the chaos that we're transitioning into order is essentially personality. And um this is because chaos and chaos doesn't go well. Chaos is in the framework of terrible situations, right? If your personality isn't well developed, and if you're in a place that's not well developed in a bad way, they don't go together. So I would say that's the uniting element of that, really. Does that make sense?
I'm not sure. Are you familiar with Discordianism? That both order and chaos are both perceptual illusions,
Hmm.
depending on how you. I take more of a Discordian view, so I think that might be what's getting in the way for me.
Hmm. I mean, they are. No, they are, right? I think they don't physically exist or objectively exist, right?
Yeah,
But that's not the thesis, right? It's rather this, because I think that there's two types of evolutions, where one of them is an evolutionary linearity for the internal subjective self. And there's one which is beyond that subjective self. It's on the objective level of things. For example, a good way, a good, for example, lost. That's an internal evolutionary linearity for reproduction. But the reproduction part is the physical part, so objective part, while the internal differs. But they are linked. It's kind of like the symbolic world linking with the objective world.
I keep
I
coming
mean,
back to the nature and nurture, or the you know, I use Dabrowski's theory of positive disintegration a lot, which I can relate to some of what Peterson's saying. And they have the concept of the first factor, which is nature or internal, and the second factor, which is what you're saying is external, and the third
yeah.
factor kind of mediates between the two.
I mean, could you say that again, if you don't mind? I
The,
was
the
just trying
it's
to.
the third factor is the will or
Yeah.
consciousness that can
Mhm.
there's two factors involved in personality development for most people, and that's the biological or internal, like what you said, that internal track of development. And then there's the second factor, which is the social, environmental, external world or nurture. And
Is that
that's
how
the
you interact with
outer
the?
external part of the development you talked about. And the third factor is the ability to be, hey, take care, John. Thanks for stopping by. The third factor is the ability to be aware of the first two factors. It emerges from the first two factors, but it's
Mhm.
separate from either one of them. And it's the ability to be aware of the nature and the nurture and direct, like consciously direct the growth in a the influences of the first two factors. You can consciously direct those instead of just be passively stimulated into development. You can start to consciously direct your development toward an ideal that you're able to intuit and visualize for yourself. That's your most authentic self. And that's done through what he calls the third factor, which is neither nature nor nurture. It's something that's kind of transcendent of both. It's that objective point you were talking about in our first conversation, that you perceive everything else from, like you could see your ideas clash
Mhm.
together, and you weren't either idea. You were this kind of outside third party perspective
Right,
watching the
that's
ideas
me.
clash. So you can do that with the development you described. You have the
Mhm.
internal and the external, but you have something that can observe both processes and kind of
Mhm.
guide the development.
So I think that's also personality.
Yeah, that's what he would say too. He calls it the personality ideal. That's the it's the ideal. The ideal you eventually discover your personality ideal through this process, and the more of it you discover, the more you can direct your development towards it as you discover more of it. But he doesn't believe that everybody has the ability to do this. He calls it developmental potential, and he believes that it's innate, and only some people have the ability. Most people will just revert back to their primary integration, whatever development they've absorbed socially at birth, religion or culture or whatever. Very few
So,
people will grow out of that and develop their own autonomous personality independent from that.
but regarding authenticity, right? What does that mean? Because I think that they're all authentic, right? They're all because okay. So Jordan has this very interesting idea, the metaphorical substrate, and from what I understand, the metaphorical substrate is this idea, right? So you have the metaphor. I'm going to give concrete examples just to make sure that this is enunciated well. So you have a metaphor, the metaphor, or metaphors, and these metaphors are single entities. Okay, they're single entities existing on its own. So that metaphor could be devil, it could be angel, etc. Right?
Devil. Let's use devil. I relate to that.
Okay, yeah, but um, so the that devil, right? Once it gets utilized into the metaphor, then it becomes a metaphor. So metaphors are single entities, right? but they become metaphors when they are utilized onto this metaphoric, relationship, right, where something becomes metaphor. So a good example is, for example, now when I say this, I don't mean it, because FYI, right, I don't have any opinions on this political leader, but Bernie Sanders, let's take, like, Bernie Sanders is the devil, let's take that metaphor. Okay, I don't have any opinions on him, just FYI, but
I didn't vote for
uh,
him.
huh
I didn't vote for him. So.
but I just, because I want people to think that, like, I'm, that I'm like saying my political ideas or something here, just using an example. But
Just we could easily use Trump or Hillary Clinton or anybody
yeah,
else.
mm, I don't want to use Trump because Trump gets too demonized. I think it's demonized way too much for no good reason, and
Well,
the
I
way that
don't
the
know for no
media,
good reason. He's a narcissist that brings a lot of it on himself. I think it's healthy to demonize narcissists. But setting that aside, we can use Bernie as the devil in our example.
so um now the moment you say Bernie Sanders is the devil, you take the potential metaphor, which is a metaphor, it's a kind of metaphor, but you take the potential metaphor and it becomes a metaphor just like that. The moment you utilize it into a metaphor on the materialistic level. And what then happens is that that metaphor now, that kind of expressed metaphor, let's say, creates drama, narrative, and metaphor. So now the drama aspect is it creates these emotions in people, if you, right, and it creates emotions within you. That's the drama. And the drama could also be the physicality of things, where things might get violent or things might get, you know, beer bottle breaking, another guy's breaking on a guy's head. And the narrative part comes where Bernie Sanders becomes the opposing villain, and you become this hero, or you become this victim, right? That's how that plays out. And the metaphor that creates is already, for example, that villain part is a metaphor. That's, and Bernie Sanders creating hell, which is, by the way, the opposition, therefore, is a metaphor. So it has this domino effect, essentially. But you could think of it as three-part domino effect, right? Narrative, drama, metaphor. And what that creates is the thoughts. Now, Peterson's metaphorical substrate idea is that there are Western metaphors through biblical. So the reason why I used devil is because devil is actually a biblical metaphor. And so he thinks that
It's a Christian metaphor. I think its biblical roots are very scant and tenuous, but it's certainly a
correct.
Christian metaphor.
I suppose it was prideful for me to say that it was biblical. I would rather clarify that onto Christian, actually. But
And more New Testament than anything. I mean,
mm,
there were demons in the New Testament that Jesus would dispel from people.
but
But
and I think
the scary Christian devil, to me, was post biblical. Its development was post biblical. Mostly, probably by the time you reach Milton, it's in its fully developed form.
mm, and not just in my case, by the way. I think it's prideful to say something is biblical on all cases, right? Because what does biblical mean? Because it's
I take
really
biblical
because
to mean originating in the text of the Bible, or
but
perhaps the Apocrypha if you include those.
I think that the Bible is the ultimate postmodern text. It's the ultimate postmodern literature.
It could be,
Because
yeah, I could see that argument.
because no other book has that many interpretations. I think that 33,000 links. Say no other book has that much.
Because it's not a unified work to begin with. I mean, it's
Right, but right.
layers and layers of text by multiple authors across time
So
periods.
how
It's
do you
more
know
like a
which
library than
interpretation is
a
right?
book.
Right? I mean, with that many links, how can we really know? we can come close to maybe. I mean, people haven't. That's why people have been studying this text for thousands of years with great, great, great detail. For example, you have the Kabbalah, the Kabbalistic tradition. You have the Theosophists. You have all these different movements within theology. You have all these different ideas. Right? That's my problem with Christians of denominations where they say, well, mine is right. Well, mine
Well,
is
it's
right.
all interpretation, but that's true of any text. Like no text interprets itself. There's always a human reading of it that intervenes.
I mean, see, that's my criticism of facts. I think that I don't believe in facts. I do. Okay, let me clarify. I think that facts exist as a element, okay, within this place beyond humans, but I think that it is impossible for us to know when we get to facts, because it's so if I say that I know that something's a fact objectively, I presuppose that I know everything. And the reasoning behind that is because when a mental object, so when an idea enters your mind and you calculate its validity or its truth, well, truth, not validity, when you calculate its truth, let's say, in the objective sense, you compare it with the mental objects that learned mental objects within your mind. And that's a limited set of mental objects that you compare it to with the aim to get the truth. But there's much more beyond. And that's my problem with facts. With facts.
Well, facts are if they
or rather subjective perception on facts, the perception that permeates throughout our culture and have permeated throughout our culture, our insistence that we know facts, that we're smart enough to know objective facts or know when we get there. I mean, Nietzsche said that's when you lost the game, the moment that you think that you're at the core of the onion.
Perhaps, possibly. I think facts, whatever they are, whatever objectivity is, if it is even out there at all, it's mediated by at least two things. It's mediated by our human experience, because we're human and we have specifically human limitations on our perceptions and what we can experience. And it's mediated by metaphor and symbol, like those subjective mental objects that you're talking about, which again is part of that human limitation. So whatever facts are, we can only have a very specifically human experience of those facts, just like a cat can only experience facts through a cat experience, or a fish can only experience fish facts as they appear to a fish.
Actually, take back what I said, actually, because you mentioned something. So I said that I know that facts exist beyond the subjective realm, but I actually don't, because then I'm presupposing that I know a fact, because then that becomes a fact.
I mean, they probably do. Like there'd be a lot we'd have to explain if they don't about what we experience of the world. But
see, I think that.
But I don't know
Okay,
that
so
humans have direct access to ultimate fact without
So
some
do you
sort of
lean towards its existence?
huh?
Do you lean towards its existence beyond the
Yeah, there's
subjective?
probably something out here that's beyond my subjectivity, but I can only encounter it through my subjectivity.
Like for me, I think that's a prideful statement, right? And I'm also prideful by that definition, because we always lean towards things, whether we know it or not. Because, see, I think that we're all prideful because, first of all, presuppositions are inescapable. You cannot escape them. Because when I tell you that we cannot get to facts, sorry, not we cannot get to facts. When I tell you that we cannot know when we get to facts, if facts exist, I'm saying that's a fact. And I'm presupposing its existence, which I think is prideful. But I cannot escape it. And you cannot
Yeah, I was
escape
about to say, I don't think you can avoid that.
But the reason why I think it's prideful is because who am I to say who am I to say it's real? Because it's an arrogant statement. even when you lean towards something, because it presupposes that you know enough to lean towards it. Even that's a filled statement. You know, I people don't realize how prideful it is to say lean towards, and they don't realize how arrogant it is to
But I
say
don't
facts.
I don't know if it's prideful or arrogant. I think it's just normal. It's just what we do as human. It was Nietzsche who said that error about life is necessary for life. Like we can't live our life in any kind of practical way off of ultimate truth. We have to make these little prideful distortions or assumptions or presuppositions just to exist and survive.
I mean, I don't know, because see, I mean, this could be a dream, right? Where I could be dreaming this up and acting out my certain ethics, right? Because I think that there are, okay, so if my mind was a person, he wouldn't do anything in the practical sense, right? Or he would be doing everything, or he could be doing anything, and that's dangerous in the cultural sense, let's say, right? But that could be a dream. So none of it could really matter in the sense of, well, is it, does the practicality even matter? So I mean, survive, maybe it's surviving, but maybe it's something else. But I do have mixed thoughts on that.
But
But
you can't live your life as though this were a dream. You'd find yourself in a lot of trouble if you tried that. And
but
there are psychotics and mental health patients that do live that way, and they bump into reality.
right, but well, see, on the practical sense, I don't act like it's a dream, right? But on an intellectual level, it's very, very possible. Like, for example, Hildebrandt was a psychologist that Freud cited in his book, The Interpretation of Dreams. Now, this psychologist is not famous, so if you Google him, you're not going to find him, because he didn't rise up with Freud. You know, Freud got all the fame, but this psychologist said that we differentiate reality and dreams on the basis of content. Therefore, uh, sorry, not we. If we differentiate the real world um with the dream world on the basis that the content is different, that's wrong, because the content remains the same. And well, you could say maybe it's due to pattern, maybe it's due to how the content is structured, maybe the structure differentiates, right? But we could also say that about dreams, where, well, I mean, they're both structured differently. What keeps them different, right? And another good reason to believe that why this could be a dream is because you don't. Okay, so you can wake up from a dream, into a dream. And so, how do you know that you didn't wake up into a dream? And how do you know that when you go to sleep, you don't kind of pass maybe onto the real world, onto the dream world? I mean, there's no stop sign where it means that you have walked beyond the dream world into the dream world. It doesn't, it, even if it's fantasy based, you could say, well, maybe it's fantasy that dictates it. But what gives you the idea that this is not a fantasy? Because you could be born at this time, or you could be born another time that could make you think that something is fantasy when it's not. So what you perceive as fantasy in your dream could be simply fantasy for someone born from a different time, or fantasy because you were born in a different time, into a different time.
There's a consistency to my waking life that my brain has adapted to, that when I'm in my waking life, things work according to that adaptation.
So is it
So
structure
that
based?
I can rely on consistently from day to day to day. And so that's how I
So
know. That's my baseline to judge dreaming against.
so is it the way that the content is structured? The dream content, as Hildebrandt put it.
I think it's the way the waking content is structured.
So, but it's still a structure argument, right? Where the structure is differentiated,
Where the structure
or
is what?
rather, the structure is different. Is that the argument that the structure is different on those two?
The structure is persistent, consistent, and as an organism, I've adapted to it in a way
Mhm.
that allows me to continue to exist in it, navigate it, experience it in a particular way with
Yep.
reliability, predictability.
Do you mind if I quickly go to the bathroom? If you don't mind.
No, not at all.
Yep. And I'll think
I'll try
of
to
a response
extemporize some
as
entertainment
well.
for them again. Do what?
Yeah. And I'll also think about, well, how I'm going to respond
Oh,
as
okay.
well. Yeah.
Okay. I'll figure something to talk about. Well, we got some commenters today. I'm happy about that. Dobez, John, it's good to see them. I'm excited about our book clubs. It looks like I'm going to have to read a Jordan Peterson book. I guess it wouldn't hurt. All these Petersonians that have been showing up in my life lately, almost as many of them as Canadians. He is Canadian, isn't he? Maybe there's a connection. Um, I'm looking at the book now. I need to order that Hans Jonas book on Gnosticism anyway, so now I can get over my $25 for the free shipping. So it looks like I'm placing an Amazon order pretty soon. Um, book clubs we talked about. This philosophy channel. We've done over an hour, so I was up at 4 this morning. I stayed up so I could do the stream. And he's overseas, so it's evening where he is. I don't know. I thought I'd had something entertaining to say. I guess I don't. Uh, this is the book I'm reading currently, or one of them. It's From Migrant to Acadian. It's the story of the Acadians up in Nova Scotia in the 17th, 18th century and their exile. And they eventually ended up in Louisiana as the Cajuns. Acadian. Um, a North American border people. Okay, back. I was just filling in time. What time is it there?
Oh, it's 11 p.m.
Oh, is that the night sky outside of your window, or is that a black shade?
Oh, it's night sky.
That is the night. Wow, there's not a star in there that I can see.
No, wait. I mean, it's not fully night sky, but there's like a house roof there, and then there's the night
Oh,
sky.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, did you have anything you wanted to respond with? Like before we wrap up?
Yeah, so I was just saying, so I think that you could make the same argument for dreams, though, saying, well, dreams are structured in the way that they're structured, which makes them real.
Well, in the
I think
moment, but
that's
not
why I think
consistently from night to night to night to night.
but what I mean is why does the structure, because I can I think I can make an equally good argument for saying dreams are structured this way because, and that's why they're real, right? Where it's the, I think that they're the same arguments. Like I can say that this mic is structured a certain way. That's why it's false. Like, what is it specifically about the structure that makes it real?
I don't think dreams are structured like in the same way that waking life is. I
Or the
think
backbone,
there are
maybe the
differences.
backbone of the content.
The backbone
Yeah, if that kind of like the spine.
uh, of the dream content or the
Yeah,
waking.
is that is that the thing you mean, maybe because like you see mash and time and such, and these are subtle elements that constitute a dream.
I'm more comparing it to my waking life
Mhm.
with the that has a certain stability and consistency to it. So I would say dreams are without that. I had a dream last night that seemed very real. It was
Yeah.
weird. There was a cat in it. My family was coming to visit. I had this fancy condo, or maybe it was a hotel. I'm not sure. See, like there's not a lot of certainty or stability in dreams because I'm not even sure if I was in a. It was this multi-level unit that I was in, and my family was coming to visit me. And I don't know if it was a hotel room. I don't know if it was a condo. I don't know if I owned it. I don't know if I was renting it. So even in the dream, I was very uncertain about this location. It doesn't have the certainty that, like, I know I'm in my bedroom right now at the same house that I've been in for almost 2 years. I know the address. I know how to find my way here every day when I
Why
leave
is it
it.
the certainty then? Because, for example, again, like I could say that, like, why does certainty equal to reality and uncertainty? Because I think
Well,
that,
it equals stability and persistence through time in a way, like a continuity in a way that you can plan and predict, and your brain has something to adapt itself to. I couldn't do that with the dream. Like even
but
last
isn't
night,
there
the
some
dream
sort?
kept shifting so much from moment to moment. It was impossible for me to orient to any one thing to have some kind of stable continuity in it.
But what if life is structured in such a way where it has, the dreams structure and the real structure, where because we get these moments of uncertainty, as I mentioned, the chaos idea that we get these moments of chaos, but bad chaos, like your daughter having being sick and these sorts of things, or your friend having cancer. And what happens is these are, I think, the same moments of uncertainty. And by the way, do you mind if I go back to the metaphorical substrate idea? I kind of went on a tangent there, but
Yeah, go ahead.
so so the metaphor creates the drama, narrative, and metaphor, which creates the thought. And Jordan's metaphorical substrate idea states that there are Western metaphors such as good, bad, and by the way, actually, before I continue on this, metaphor by what I mean by metaphor is a something that's related, sorry, two unrelated objects bringing about meaning. For example, when you say I understand, so I understand, it doesn't actually, those two things doesn't actually link together, where knowledge doesn't link with standings under something, but metaphor links those two things together. And so that's what I mean. So um so Jordan's idea is that there are, within the West, there are Christian slash biblical metaphors, but those metaphors are potential metaphors, so they have the potentiality to be metaphors. And the West has made them materialized metaphors, where or expressed metaphors. So they were unexpressed metaphors. Sorry, some of them were expressed in the Bible, like the Psalms and such. So metaphor itself was expressed biblically. So if you look at the Psalms, there are metaphors. If you look at the symbolic parts of the Bible, metaphorical symbolism. So metaphor is expressed, but there are also literal parts to it, such as the devil and such, that are potential metaphors. So they're unexpressed metaphors. Looking back from this time period, right? I'm not saying from their period. And the West took those unexpressed metaphors and expressed them. So they became expressed metaphors, such as the devil being used metaphorically, or angel being used. She's an angel. He's an angel. Or she's got horns. Or even the dirtier version of that may be seen as metaphorical. So now Jordan then states, well, those collective expressed metaphors, because they became collective due to this unity of expression, let's say, these collective metaphors formulated collective drama, collective narrative, and collective drama, which expressed collective thoughts. And that's the idea. And so he believes that if religion, well, no, I don't know about this part. I'm not sure about what I'm gonna say. Because he said if you're not religious, then the biggest way of interpreting the world falls apart. But maybe this part is me adding on to it, or maybe the whole part is me kind of interpreting in my own way. But I think that the fundamental idea is that this is probably me adding something to the table, which is that if religion didn't exist and those metaphors didn't exist, then the good parts of history, a good chunk of the good parts of history would have disappeared, because history utilized metaphors, but also a bad chunk as well. A good chunk of a bad chunk would have also disappeared, such as, and you mentioned demonizing the right people. I don't think that you can demonize the right people. I think that rather, okay, so I think that we can say someone is demonic, or an idea is demonic, right? Because it implies being possessed. But even that's risky, by the way. But I think that if we demonize people through using terms as evil, parasites, satanic, etc., that implies that that person is as evil as their ideas, right? Because if their ideas are satanic, if their ideas are really, really terrible, usually,
Yeah, I read all of that as a form of
people don't
hyperbole, which is a
like.
type of metaphor or
Yeah, but
figure.
same, but I think that they are real consequences in regards to interpretation.
Yeah,
As
but you
in,
can't control how someone's going to interpret anything.
but I think you can, even though you can't control it as a whole, I think that you can increase the words, that the play on words is dictated by people's proclivities on understanding them. So let me phrase this differently. I think that you can increase someone's proclivity, for example, to interpret a certain way. Like, for example, when I say, so in this conversation, what I did was I kind of expanded some of the ideas where it started off as vague, right? Like the personality thing. And then I expanded more and more and more on it, which increased the audience's proclivity to interpret it a certain way. And even though it's not, sorry, let me adjust the AC because it's really cold here. But even though it doesn't take full control. I mean, what do you have control of anything, right? Like what do you have control of fully?
I, I have control of my own purposes for communicating, which is to express, to bring the inside out, to express my thoughts and what I'm trying to say in a form that I can put them in to get them out.
See,
And
I
I'm
think
not going to
that's
constrain that by how other people might take it. Like, I don't want that kind of constraint on my speech. I'm not going to
but
aim
there's
my
always constraint.
communication toward the lowest common denominator of people who might take it in the most extreme way possible.
I
I'm
think
trying
that
to make it authentic, and then people can react to it how
right.
it
I think that
authentically came from me.
for me, right. I think that every sentence is constrained, and I think that that constraint should be dictated by whether it brings into their perception what we want to be expressed.
But I
So
can't
rather, so
control their
like
perception. Okay.
like for me, right? So you use authenticity. Now, for me, authenticity also matters, but I don't think that the level of authenticity of my words are are existed in the beyond, within beyond me, essentially, right? I think that it exists in people's minds, and I think that you can tweak it through, you can kind of send what you're thinking by managing your words in the way that they will, like for example, um if you're explaining a philosophical idea to someone that's illiterate and you want it to be as authentic as possible, you simplify the language. You don't use the terminology that they're not familiar with, right? So
Yeah, I'm really
you
bad at that.
same, right? But what you do is you don't place the idea into thin air. You place the idea into their minds, essentially, and as you're speaking, you tweak those words so to your authenticity in a way that authenticity is expressed fully in their mind. So that's my take on that, where I think that you should not arrange your words in a way where the authoritarian woke moralists will say be happy about. But I think that rather you should word it in a way that's authentic as possible. So I'm
My
not
dude.
saying so I'm not saying fall prey to the degenerate woke moralists, but yeah. I made a mistake there where I said degenerates. So I kind of demonized them. So what does that see? I mean, I disagree with what I did there, but I think it does happen, and just shows.
No, but that's authentically what you were thinking. Like
Hmm.
I, I, I have a better idea of what the contents of your mind were around that when you said degenerate than if you tried to dress it up as something else.
So maybe let me maybe make it more authentic then. When I use degenerates here, I'm not attributing degeneracy to their whole being, but rather degeneracy to their the kind of being where they say you have to speak this way because it offends me. That's the kind of
I
degeneracy I'm
don't care
speaking
if
about.
people get offended at all.
Right, same, but but that's
But
what I'm calling degeneracy.
you were worried about what you call drama, which sounded more like violence. Like if you use too much hyperbole, some unstable, over hypersensitive people are gonna react, like be stimulated by that to enact
I
violence.
I think that what's important is we act responsibly. So you
I
can
don't think
be
that's not, I'm not responsible for how people take my words and act on them.
yeah,
I
yeah,
don't think
but
that's my responsibility. The
do
locus
you
of
see any
control
limits? Like, do
is
you see any limits to for example, we can you see people sometimes, dehumanizing people, calling them cockroaches and such.
yeah, that
And
happens, and hate speech is legal here in the U.S.
I think it should be legal.
Well, it is.
Um, I was in a debate with someone who, at the start of the debate, thought, well, it should be illegal, and I said, no, no, no. I think that so we have communities, right? There are implicit rules within communities. For example, this is right now a mini community, this conversation, and if someone joined and started swearing at us and started insulting us and started but start saying these things without any rational argument for it, he's breaking that internal code, right? Which is that this is a rational Socratic session of argumentation. So I think that's fine, but I think it's not fine to put it into law.
It's not breaking my code because it it's giving me information about that person that I would want to have.
Oh, right. But what I'm saying is, would you keep that person here in this
It
Zoom
depends on
meeting?
how it goes. Like
They
I very
if they
rarely have to kick anybody out of my
like
groups.
if they said, if they were like shouting like Nazi, 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 Nazi without any
I would be fascinated. Like I would sit there and like, oh, show me more of who you are. This is the kind of stuff
but
I want to know about
but
a person.
but that's what I mean. But what if they didn't have any rationale behind their thoughts, where they just said, like, you asked them, show me, and they just kept saying Nazi, 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 like, you know, tell basically like calling
I
us
would be
Nazi.
curious. I would want to know more. But I also work in mental health, so I'm used to that kind of like
But
you
same, by
do.
the way, I would also find that person quite. I think that I would see that person as a warning because I see people as warnings.
I was on a podcast with a Nazi one time by accident. I joined this other
Huh.
person's podcast and didn't realize. And the conversation was great. We ended up talking about mental health and his trauma and what led him to Nazism.
I
And that
mean,
was much more of a productive conversation than if I had said, "Oh my God, a Nazi! Get me off of
no,
this
yeah,
podcast."
no, same. Like I talked with Nazis online. Um, how I how that came to be is quite funny, but um, basically I wound up in this like like on Telegram out of curiosity. I was browsing servers and I wound up in this Nazi server, and I started talking with them. I don't mean started to. I don't talk with them, but what I mean is, I briefly talked with them, and then I like, left the group basically. But I was asking them questions like, "Well, what do you believe?" They were very open about their beliefs. They were Holocaust deniers. I don't know if that was your case as well, but they denied the Holocaust. They believe that. Well, I don't want to. I mean, I don't want the YouTube video to get censored, so I don't want to say the next thing. But
Oh yeah, I
I'm
don't
gonna
know
hint.
what the YouTube rules are, so if you think it'll get my
Yeah,
channel,
yeah. I'm just gonna hint at it. Bracket.
what?
bracket. You know, brackets. The media and brackets. That's what they believe in as well.
Oh,
Does that make sense?
I'm not
The
getting it. So
the media. You don't get the reference, or
does it have to do with the J word?
yeah,
Okay,
you get it right.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. So they're also very open about it. I asked them, well, do you guys think like so? My dad is Jewish. I said my dad is Jewish. What do you guys think about that? And I said, he's a non-practicing Jew, but by genes, ancestral, in the ancestry sense. And um, what they said was well, they don't quote unquote hate the normal Jewish people. They just hate the quote unquote. They just hate the media. Hollywood and bankers.
All of the cultural influences,
They
the
just hate
influence.
I mean, in their words, they just hate. They just hate the ones that. Okay, I don't know if I don't think the video would actually get. Do you think that the video would get censored if I say it? Like, because I'm quoting them.
I don't know. So I don't even know what happens. Do they just pull this one video down? Do I lose my whole channel? I don't know. Do I get a
They would just
strike?
pull this whole. I think that they would pull this video down.
Oh, I don't know. I kind of like we'd lose this whole conversation. So it's up to you if you think it's worth the risk. I believe that words have the power that you give them, and if somebody's going to give my words a power that I'm not giving them myself, I'm not responsible for that. They are. Like,
But to
so
what
I'm not
degree
going
are
to
you
change my
responsible?
words just because someone else might empower them in a certain way that
But
I'm not.
I think, okay, so what I disagree on with the radical left and the radical right is that they okay, so first of all, they okay, so here's a problem I have with the radical left, first of all, which is that they think that words are that if something offends them, then they have the right to like silence.
Yeah, because they're hypersensitive control freaks with no
Mm,
internal locus of control whatsoever, and they're at the
right.
mercy of everything external to themselves, and they have
Right.
no agency.
That's my problem with them, and the problem I have with both the radical left and the radical right is that they both don't use words in a way where so you can say something in a way where when someone interprets it um in a certain way, it's not it doesn't stem from you. It's not because of you. It's because of them. Or you can say something in a way where it is because of you. Like for example, if I say that if I say that stand up straight with your shoulders back is a symbolic statement, and someone interprets it in a way that isn't uh what I meant, as an authenticity, right? That isn't authentic to me. It's my fault because I didn't because it could mean
No,
all
it's
sorts of
their
things.
fault. That
For
happens to
example,
me all the time. People are constantly taking things I say in a way I didn't mean them. That's nothing to do with me. That's on
but
them.
but 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 it's such an open statement to say this is like it's like saying Jesus is symbolic, but not defining in what way you think is symbolic, right? His symbolic
I
way.
know what I'm intending when I use my word. I know what meaning I'm encoding in them. And
But
if someone else is gonna it,
don't you
extract a
think being
different meaning from that, that is not. I cannot be responsible for that. That's not.
but
That's not where my locus of control is.
but if I want to be precise with it, and I say that Jesus is symbolic, but I'm not precise with it, and I say something so vague that it can be interpreted in any way, basically. I think it's my fault if they start making up their own symbolic stuff with it, right? And I might intend that as well. There might be a case where I intend that, but let's say in this case I don't. But if I say that Jesus is symbolic and he stands for X and A and B and C, let's say, right? So these different things, and say that that's what the symbol stands for. And someone says, so what you mean is that Jesus is a feminist? That's not my fault, right?
No, that's the other person interpreting
Yeah,
that
that,
way. Like you can
so I think
clarify and get him to
you can.
understand what you were saying, but you can't be responsible for his interpretation that that's what you were saying.
So I think that if you say something in an imprecise way in relation to how you want it to be interpreted, and if you don't do your best, instead like you say something so like opposed to what you want them to interpret it as, and so how your authenticity, then it's your fault, right? But to a great extent, like for example, when Hitler said, round up the Jews, he didn't mean something else. He didn't mean like it's very clear because if I go and say,
And
well,
that's also a
he meant that in a
command.
symbolic sense, he meant it in a in a metaphorical sense. Like
But
then what I'm saying is so it's my fault for not on for because it is precise, right? And the way that he says it is precise, and the way that he doesn't stop the people from rounding up the Jewish people is
but if
it's
you're in a position of
all in the
power
details.
and you give commands and you have people accustomed to obeying those commands, that's different from the type of speech I'm talking about, where I'm just expressing my thoughts and my feelings. I'm not giving people commands. And even if I did, they, unless I'm their boss or have some authority over, they don't have to listen to me.
Hmm.
So saying that what Hitler said, that was a specific command that he had the authority to give, and people interpreted it as that's a very specific type of speech. And the type I'm talking about, like calling Bernie Sanders the devil, that's not telling someone to do something. That's not me giving an
But it's
order
very
or a
vague.
command.
It's very vague. What does
But
it mean?
it's not a command. Like I haven't. If I call Bernie Sanders the devil, A, I'm not telling anyone to do anything, and
It might
B,
be,
they don't have to listen to me, even if they did think I was. I have no authority over anybody.
but but sometimes there are
Yeah, there are crazy people that are gonna do
there
all
are
kinds of weird things and do all kind of crazy things, and
there are
my position is
there are
they're not my
commands embedded.
responsibility.
I think sometimes there are commands embedded within the structure of sentences and phrases and words and
Implicit
paragraphs.
commands.
Yeah, they're
I'm not putting it in there. So if people are hearing them again, that's happening in between their two ears. So that's their anything that happens within someone's
it's also
head
the
is
way you
their
say it, right?
responsibility. And nobody has any business listening to anything I say because I don't have
Like,
any authority over those people. They're
but
listening to a total stranger and letting them tell them what to do.
if I say that if I say like, for example, if I say Bernie Sanders is the devil, and we need to eradicate the devil, or we need to
Well,
get
see,
rid
now
of
you're
the devil,
adding a command.
like,
You're adding something on to just saying he's the devil. You're
okay,
you're proposing a course of action.
but that's what I mean, where there might be a command, an implicit command embedded within the structure of the words or words which make the sentences slash phrases
Unless
slash.
you're putting it in there, then it's an inferred command on their end, on their part.
But what about the body language as well, where
I don't
because
know. I
also
don't get body language.
like the body language I think also opens up pathways to um certain interpretations. For example, if you look at Hitler's or Stalin's body language, there is this us versus them.
Hitler, that might be a bad example because he was in a specific position of power that most ordinary people are not in when they're using speech.
Or if you take figures such as, you know, the Turner Diaries,
The term what?
the Turner Diaries, the
Oh yeah, yeah. The white supremacist.
yeah, yeah, Nazi night white supremacist book.
I mean, I don't know. I don't read. I haven't read them. I don't know much about them, but I know.
Would you say that's a book with an implicit command?
I don't know what's in them.
Okay, so I haven't read it either, but the story I want to read it because I'm curious. But uh, the story goes like this, from what I heard, where it uses very vague terminology, but for example, it says words such as the chosen one, who that was born the same year that Hitler was born, and 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 other things such as but there's some terminologies there that kind of link into like Nazi Germany as such. And then there's also precise so he was a, I don't remember if he was an engineer or a physicist, but he gives very precise details on how how the plan would go, and how bombing would work and stuff like that. From what I heard, and this is what I heard from a YouTuber named Thought Slime, which I don't respect very much, but it's nevertheless, his nevertheless like given me information on that through his video. So I'm gonna give credit where it is due. The reason why I don't respect him is because of the way he speaks on Jordan Peterson and the way that he speaks on. I mean, he's a radical leftist, in my opinion. I don't know if you're familiar with his work, but
Never heard of it.
um, but would you say that those are, because that book caused a lot of the, like, for example, there was a man that actually did the bombing, that was where in the book the FBI building was bombed. you know,
Is
the
that
guy did it,
Oklahoma?
possibly, and and the guy did it like as the book, as the book foretold it.
But here's what my
For
thing. It
example,
it seems like we're shifting exact because I'm talking about ordinary speech. You and I talking to people in our communities on the street, on social media, and then you keep saying, "Well, but what about what this thing Hitler said?
yeah.
But what about the Turner Diaries thing?" Those are very extreme examples outside of the realm of just ordinary
Well,
speech that I'm talking about. I'm talking about me saying stuff and how people
yeah.
take it, or you saying something and how people might take it. So
So
if you're using the criteria of what Hitler said and how people might take that, or what the Turner Diary said and how the people that he speaks to might take it, that's totally outside of the realm of what I'm
okay,
talking.
my point is um that I think that there are levels of responsibility within the levels of interpretation. Sorry, let me clarify. I think that there are levels of responsibility that we have the for for the proclivities of interpretation that people have, and we may have zero responsibility for how they interpreted our work or what we have said, as I gave in the case of um saying, for example, that Jesus is symbolic, but having a more precise aim, right? That in that sense, I bear the responsibility for their interpretation. But if I was as precise as I can, I bear less responsibility, way less responsibility, almost zero, because we're always responsible for everything.
If the standard is don't be like Hitler or don't be like the Turner Diary, I'm comfortable that I'm meeting that standard. Like I'm not worried that somebody's going to mistake me for any like my rhetoric for theirs.
I think that
I
we
feel a
unconsciously do that.
responsibility to express myself as authentically as I'm able to. And then what
Yeah.
happens after it leaves me, I feel much less of a responsibility for.
So I think that if someone really feels that a person is demonic, yeah, they should say it, right? But if we're not, or satanic, demonic, if a person feels that another person is that way, they have the right to say that. However, I think that most people actually don't feel that way, because it speaks on their whole being, and it speaks on who they are, and it speaks
Yeah,
on
that's why
not and
I
and
want them to say it.
and, and it also, I think that this kind of language, the normalization of this kind of language, such as evil people, good people, angelic people, has normalized ideological categorization of the whole, essentially. So the person is a person is the whole, right? It's a whole being that's beyond these categorizational boxes, and it has normalized stupidity on our culture's front, I think, where we don't delve into the details of, like, for example, I think that the consequences of actions are impossible to calculate. The even so when I say right, so whole consequences of actions, I think, are impossible to calculate as a whole, because there's this pattern of consequence, right? This consequential pattern that happens through the domino effect. And if we take an ethical framework where we say, is this ethical because of this consequence, or because of this intended or unintended consequence, etc. Well, it didn't just what it that's my problem with the whole with the whole ethicalization of everything, where on an intellectual level, where what these what it actually does is people often take a single so they take an action, right? Say someone cheating on their wives, and now they take a consequence. Their wife kills themselves. That's a single consequence. Does that make sense? It's a single consequence, but they don't include the other consequences through the domino effect, which is the pattern of consequences as a whole, which I think is wrong. And even and then you also look at the system of criminality, where some people investigate a criminal and try to answer the question of whether what they did was ethically right or wrong by their intention. But I think that's also wrong, because you take one sub personality or personality, you say, well, that's it. We found it, but I mean, can you really know where it came from? To what
I
degree?
think that people are responsible for their own actions
To what degree?
to all degree. Like, who, if they're not, who is? Like, if I call Bernie Sanders a devil, and then somebody goes out and kills Bernie Sanders and went to court and said, Your Honor, I did it because Jeff said he's a devil, that person's responsible for what they did, not Jeff.
But I think that, so for me, I think that I am partly responsible for all my unintended consequences, but not just me. I think that
Oh.
within the domino, because okay, so there's this idea
There's
that
there's a big garbage truck here outside the window, and it's very
huh,
loud.
but but there's this idea which is that that we're fully responsible for the whole pattern of consequences that falls out as the whole. But I think that's wrong, because that idea is wrong, because it presupposes that people are not conscious and they don't have any choices and they don't have any free will. Because if I'm the whole consequence of something as a whole, then that presupposes that the person not having any choice in it. It's just me. And same thing with interpretation. That's the problem with the radical leftists, where they state, well, this thing is offensive. Okay, you think it's offensive? Okay, fair enough. You think it's offensive, but it's like, if you say that it's offensive for everybody, and objectively, you're saying that people are not conscious and that they don't have any free will and that they're just zombies, because you're stating that they don't have any proclivities to interpret it in other ways. And so it's just presupposing that people are stupid and zombie-like. No, zombies, literally. No free will, no consciousness, no conscious thought, nothing. And that's the radical leftist thought on speech.
And who cares if it's offensive? Like, where did this, like, in my generation, where did this idea come from that people have the right to not be offended? That wasn't a thing when I was growing up. People get offended all the time. It's not the end of the world if you hear something that offends you. And all of a sudden, there's this mentality that everyone has to be protected from offense.
Dr. Peterson has a very interesting idea on that. He believes that the Oedipal mother, so you can think of this like a Jungian interpretation of culture. So it's a cultural political commentary, but with the Jungian framework. So he says that the Oedipal mother is manifesting essentially throughout culture. And the Oedipal mother is dangerous because it's the mother that says, I will take care of you, but you don't need to grow up and you shouldn't grow up.
Yeah, like the
And
suffocating mother.
and so the Oedipal mother's manifestation throughout culture is also dangerous because then it says, you guys don't have to grow up. Right? The
Yeah.
culture says you don't have to grow up. I'm gonna keep you safe. That's the safe spaces.
Yeah, but you can't have a society like you can't build a society on that.
That's why nobody's growing up.
Yeah. Yeah, I noticed that. They have no resiliency. They have no agency. They can't do anything for themselves. Like when I was growing, if you got offended, you turned the channel, you changed the station, you took yourself out of the situation, you went somewhere else, you stopped talking to the person. There was something you could do, some action you could
And
take
sometimes
to
being offended
mitigate
is
your
useful.
offense. And now they're passive victims. If they're offended, they have to wait for an adult to come, and it's an external solution. They have to wait for the adult to come and stop the offensive stimulus. That's the complete opposite. It seems a lot easier to just turn the channel
And
than to
and
sit there and wait for a parent to come and shut down the TV station so you don't have to see that offensive thing anymore.
and what does being offended actually mean technically? I think it means two things, which is either something that offends you, that disgusts you,
Yeah, some
something like the
unpleasant
Holocaust,
emotion, which no one has the
something.
right to never experience an unpleasant emotion.
So it could be, so either that's the first definition, or something offensive, which is more prominent nowadays, is something that is a strong opinion that opposes your opinion.
Yeah, like a moral outrage. Like they're seeing something that they don't think should be. Well, they're not the
Like,
ruler of the universe. We have a political process. So
like
if you don't think something should be,
do you know
you
Ricky
have to use
Gervais?
the process to get it changed.
Do you know Ricky Gervais?
Richard who?
Ricky Gervais.
Oh yeah, I like Ricky.
Yeah, same. And for example, in this case, right, he made it. He made a joke about trans people, which opposed the opinions of the.
Oh, I think I saw the clip. It was funny.
Mm. And okay, so let me think. What was like there was another joke that he actually made. So at the time, I used to be a Christian, and there was a joke that he made. I remember about Christianity where he said, I think I don't remember, but it was about Jesus coming back. Like, but um, like that joke offended me, but I laughed and I said, haha, it's like, and it's good to get offended in that case because it open like if you have a strong opinion about something, another strong opinion enters the realm of realm that with that contains your strong opinion and opposes it, then congrats, your mind has now opened. And in that, like when I used to be a Christian, I was trying to balance out faith-based presuppositions and logic-based presuppositions. And the fundamental difference is that faith-based presuppositions are things that you presuppose by faith, such as God, and logic-based presuppositions are things that you presuppose by logic. And the problem with faith-based presuppositions are that philosophically they don't fall when logic-based presuppositions confront them. And in their absurdity. And that was I was trying to balance those out. So that was my whole faith journey, where I was trying to balance those two out. And then I realized, well, you know what? Actually, I I'm not going to deny my nature. I'm a philosopher by nature. That's my nature, philosopher and artist. And um I'm not going to let that fear control me, because I always had because when I left religion, I was in chaos. And I remember I was scared, but at the same time loved it, but it was scary. So then I went back to religion, and then I'm like, now I actually feel good in that chaos. Maybe I needed that, going back to religion. Maybe I need to, like, I don't know why, but now maybe it was a me. I think it's a journey to self actualization, right? Where I want to actualize myself as the philosopher and the artist as much as possible, and kind of the
I think you,
authentic me. And I suppose that links into your theory, by the way, about your the theory that you like, because I said, about the three personalities, or three selves.
oh, the third factor. I think you should, but I don't think you're going to do it through strict logic alone, especially not the artist part.
How do you think? I mean, right? I don't approach everything that, like, with art. I approach it both logically and and emotionally. And but what I mean is, I stay away from faith-based presuppositions, except on the practical level. So I don't believe those. I don't believe in the ethics that I act out philosophically. I believe in it practically, and I don't really believe in it practically, but I act it out practically. But yeah, but I think that's still a faith-based presupposition, because
But
what
I
you
think
act
we
out.
have those as human. Like we can't avoid those. That's part of being human. We're not Spock, like Vulcan robot machines that only run on logic.
So to clarify, I want to actualize. I'm actualizing myself as much as possible as the philosopher and the artist, through not through working on one component, such as logic, but rather ridding myself or cleansing myself of those presuppositions that interfere with the self actualization on those parts. So, for example, if you're a Christian, that interferes with the self actualization of the philosopher, where when you act out that philosophy, that philosopher aspect of but you're also religious, you can't act it out fully, because now you can't really challenge those ideas that you have on the religious level. Or if you're someone that does not believe in acting out emotionally, that would interfere with your artistic self and your philosophical self, possibly, when you're writing. But actually, it's the artistic self then, because if you're designing something, that's art. But
Well, I think it's finding outlets for all that. You either compartmentalize your philosophy and find an outlet for that, and compartmentalize your art and find an outlet for that, or you find an activity where you can use all of those aspects and integrate them into something larger. So find an activity that draws on your logical side and your artistic or emotional side.
so for me, I believe in essence, where I did a lot of journaling a few days ago. So there's this idea of the creative being,
Idea of what?
or rather, so the idea is this: So think of it like this: you have space around you, and how much you're able to move within that space and move like potential, where it's like this infinite movement, is let's call it the being of creativity, and kind of the amount of being of creativity, or rather the amount of creative being. Let's call it that. It's the idea. So now, I was thinking, well, how can I have as much freedom in moving within the space as much as possible? So, but that space is knowledge, and that space is kind of ego expansion. There we go. That's the word. Because we talked about this last time, right? So how I was thinking, how can I expand my ego as much as possible? I was thinking, well, what if I just expand my ego into everything, where it's like it doesn't it's not an essence, like philosophy or arts or something. It's not utilized. It's just everything. Now that might make sense on the surface, but here's the problem: if you explore everything, then you're exploring nothing, because you're just wandering around. And then I thought, well, maybe you need mini subjects within that to utilize that that what your ego expands into, right? Where you have these mini subjects. But the problem with that is that if you have 10 mini subjects, again, you're not exploring as much as possible, because then you're just delving in and out, in and out, in and out for a limited periods of time. And I thought, well, okay, what about this? What if you explore, what if you have one or two subjects, but they're forms, they're not essences. So they're, let's say, metaphysics and poetry. So you utilize being onto poetry and metaphysics, let's say, because then you can actually. And I thought, well, okay, but the problem with that is that it's still limited, because it's limited to that form. No, that's so it. Even though it strips out the problems of the ones that I stated before, the problem with this idea is that even though it's more than like dipping in and out of these the 5 to 10 subjects, it's still, if it's a form. And I thought, well, okay, what about essence? So all the forms of an essence. So, for example, all the philosophical forms, metaphysics, epistemology, etc., are linked to one another, which is the and that link is the essence, essentially, right? That's why it's the forms. That's why the forms are the boxes that the essence are contained within. And so, well, okay, what about that? What if you have one or two essences that you utilize the whole of being into, or the whole of being that you perceive? So your whole of being, let's say, within your mind, into where your ego expands, right? I thought, well, that's the best idea, I think, there, because that what that means is that you get to. So when you utilize something, you're not just wandering around, exploring nothing. You're exploring. You can go deep. It's like if you go to a museum and you're just wandering around. What's the point? But I mean, there is a point, right? But if you're just wandering around, you don't get as much as you can. But if you have an aim in your mind, maybe your aim is to get inspired, right? And let's say inspiration is the essence there. It's not a form. Let's say if it's a form, it's still limited. Like, let's say that your form is, when you're exploring the museum, to create an abstract piece relating to a Hegelian theory. Then that limits it, because then you're limited into that box where you cannot you don't explore as much still, right? But if there is an essence, or it's just inspiration for something, that's the aim. And within the essence, these forms are linked to one another through the essence. Therefore, it's the ultimate exploration.
It, I don't think you ever get to the whole all at once. I think you do it through parts, through explore. You're never going to fully expand your ego to the circumference.
Oh, I agree with that, but I think that that's let me actually I wrote this down, but in a nice way, but this the
I
so
think
the
it's okay to do all of it. It's okay to explore the museum haphazardly and randomly. It's okay to do it with a purpose. It's okay to take a particular theme and explore. And I think you can switch from moment to moment to whatever suits you.
I'm just looking for the because
If
this
you
might
want
not
a larger, like all-encompassing systematic plan,
come here.
you could try
Yep.
that.
So here's what I wrote down. So the creative way of being goes or gets utilized into a core essence. So essence that's a core of you. And that is as limitless as you can get with the ego expansion, because if you're exploring everything in and of itself, you're exploring utterly nothing, right? And this makes the way of being even fuller in a real sense. So it's not the creative way of being so it's not the creative way of it's not being itself that can limit your ego expansion, but rather it's how you utilize being. And it's about utilizing it into the right thing that makes it limitless. And when I say limitless, I don't mean like in the objective sense and literally you're perceiving the all-encompassing being, but kind of as limitless as you can get. Does that make more sense?
I'm not sure. I'm still trying to figure out what your goal is for exploration. Because the way I've done, the way that it's turned out for me is I just explore wherever my interests take me, and then over time I start to see a pattern to that. But it's not anything I'm consciously
What's the
guiding.
pattern?
It depends on whatever it can be many things. There's
What would you say your obsession is?
probably personality development or personal growth, self development. That
Self-development.
seems to be where everything's led over the years that I've had an interest in.
See, that's an essence. So you
But I think
utilize
that
you utilize
emerges through just exploration in general. Like you might not know what you're.
oh, I agree with that. It's kind of like an onion, right? Like where in my journey, for
Yeah,
example, like I for example, I did sleight of hand magic before. I still practice it because it feels nice in my hands, but um it's an art form. And poetry is also an art form. And drawing is also an art form. And I did these things. And I was focusing too much on the forms and I realized, wait, hold on. What is really I was journaling a few days ago and I said, well, hold on now. Let's take a moment to breathe. Because you asked me why am I thinking of all these things, right? What's the aim as well? And sorry, not why am I thinking of all these things? Sorry, what's the I'm sorry for I didn't mean to misrepresent what you said. What I let me rephrase that. So you asked me what is the aim of these ideas and what does it point to? And it all started with me kind of questioning, well, how can I structure my life? And I was questioning, well, now hold on. So I'm very high in openness. And I said, well, is it okay? So I'm interested in, so I love philosophy, I love arts. And I said, what are the commonalities of these? I said I love pure moments of joy. I said, what are the commonalities? And it's essence. That's the commonality. That they're not forms, they're essences. And I said, is that? And I said, well, is philosophy as the deepest subject? And I was questioning whether art is also the deepest subject because they go beyond these limited spaces such as science and such, where there's facts. You go beyond facts, and that's, for example, you go beyond physics, right? Metaphysics. And I was questioning, well, hold on now. Is it sorry. And I was questioning, hold on now. Is it specifically like are these so what is really my desire here? If I'm really focusing on the creativity part here. And I said, so is it the essences that I'm really interested in, or is it the creative being? Is it that I want? Is it ego expansion that I want? And then I was questioning, well, I think it's that movement within the space that I desire, as much movement as possible because of my openness. And I said, well, then how do you access that? Do you access that through these essences, or do you access that through exploring everything? And I think that I think that the goal should be to find the essence that you utilize the being that you perceive into, or else you're just wandering around your whole life and you're not exploring as much as you can. Because this is weird, but the less you utilize, the less you explore, and the more you utilize, the more you explore. So, for example, I started with exploring, let's say, and then I start utilizing, and let's say I utilize into forms now, like I did my journey with magic, where I utilized psychology and such into magic, let's say. And so, well, that's exploring further now. Now that I get to explore further, and I said, well, now I realize that it's the essences that is me, right? Because all of these actually were essences, and that's the ultimate exploration. Because now you can now you're not just dipping into these different things. Neither are you dipping into a form. You're dipping into these, let's say, one or two essences your whole life. And I think that's the deepest form of exploration and the most amount of freedom.
I think just exploring it all is going to put you on the track. At least for me. Like, even when I thought I was just randomly exploring, there was a path to it that I was on.
Oh, there's always utilization. But wait, what do you mean by path? Do you mean an ultimate utilization instead of the miniature?
Like, every exploration that I've done, even if it seemed frivolous or random, over time, it all fed into some larger purpose, or it had a direction to it, even if I didn't understand it at the time. That's why I think if you just explore, even it's like a comic book or something that interests you, it's going to feed in. You're not going to be drawn to anything that's not somehow part of your authentic self. And so even if it seems extraneous or purposeless, if you're drawn to it, explore it, because
No,
it's
right,
going
right,
to
right.
feed into that larger, like that deep self that's going to emerge over time.
No, yeah, like for example, like in my journey, I realized all of these, like what all of these explorations led to was these two essences, arts and philosophy. So I definitely see that pattern. By the way, do you mind if I use the bathroom quickly?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Thanks.
We'll go. I'll, I'll, hi guys. How y'all doing? It's been 2.5 hours. We should probably wrap up anyway. So, I think this is just the beginning of many conversations. Um, Philosophy and art, those are two big domains. I mean, just take a look at the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy online to see how broad just that one domain can be, and then art. So I think he's probably still in the process of exploring and integrating everything. So I would just say keep exploring. Read philosophy, do art, write poetry. It doesn't have to. I hate the word overthink, but you really don't have to overthink it. Just do it. But I can understand wanting to be intentional and kind of meta about it all too, because that's part of the exploration and that awareness that comes with it. Which that could be that elusive essence he's looking for is just more self-awareness through philosophy and art. Or maybe that's mine and I'm projecting it into his. Or maybe we're both similar and on the same path. I don't know. It's been 2.5 hours. I like his microphone. I want to get one. Would it make me look gay? I don't care. I want one anyway. I love colored lights. I always have. I wonder what time it is there. Like midnight. Let me see. Oh, I can't sing songs because of YouTube strike. Which I hope we don't get one today. I didn't hear anything controversial, but I don't know how YouTube or the masses or mainstream people think. So I'm sure somebody could find something in here to put a strike on. Do I have anything else interesting to show and tell? There he is. I was just killing time again. It's been 2.5 hours, so we should probably wrap it up. I
Yeah,
think this is
yeah.
probably the first conversation of many. And
Huh?
you might want to go back and watch this one part because I left some notes for. I had some additional thoughts on what you just said, and I
Yep.
verbalized them out loud. But I don't know if I could pull them up again right at this moment.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Sure, yeah, yeah.
But is there
And
anything you want to close with or add at the end? Do you have anything you want to promote other than your new channel, which you're gonna send me the link for later, and I'll
yeah,
put it up? But do you have
yep,
any
yep, yep.
other social media
Yeah. So
sites, websites?
I just like to actually close with a prayer. I'm just
Okay.
kidding. I'm just kidding.
Oh, I can do a
Yeah,
prayer.
because it was kind of a cheeky thing to say, but
Oh,
after a debate where we're like, but uh, I mean, I'd say as closing thoughts, this is definitely the first of many conversations. I do agree.
because it started with the little tiny human beings inside of our genes, and it ended up with exploring philosophy and art.
Mm, I think that there's a good flow. There's a very, very good flow to the conversation. It it's yeah.
I
Mm,
think so. I hope so. I hope our viewers find so.
right.
So,
Is
so
there
if
any
you
is there any do Satanists have any kind of maybe symbolic prayers or something? Just
satanic prayers, I should have one. Should.
why don't we close with that? Where you
Grab my copy of Paradise Lost. I'm sure there's a passage in here. There is one I like that I just got to remember where it is. See, bad Satanist. I feel
No,
like I should
literally.
be better at this. Yeah, this because I work in mental health, and this passage kind of always sticks with me. So we can close with this.
Hmm.
Escaped the Stygian pool, though long detained in that obscure sojourn, while in my flight through utter and through middle darkness born, with other notes than to the Orphean lyre, I sung of chaos and eternal night. He's talking about his journey through darkness. And as someone that works with mental health and crises and trauma, that passage always kind of sticks with me.
Is that is that a symbolic prayer? Like when kind of like maybe asking for something or
Yeah, well, Milton was blind, and so several books of the poem, he does these invocations
yeah.
to God, we suppose, but there's also this other being he identifies as the spirit.
Mm.
And for the like poetic sight there, or inner vision or inner sight to continue his poem. And this is from one of those invocation passages where he's asking for like the Greeks would call them the muses, seeing muses, the rage of Achilles. It's his version of the invocation to the muses, except instead of the muses, it's to the eternal spirit or God or Holy Spirit. And
Oh,
he was blind, just as Homer was purported to be. So he draws on a lot of those parallels too. It's
here's
for inner
something
vision.
interesting. The War of Arts, not the Art of War, the War of Arts. So it's a book about art. It said that when you create art, so the author said he interacts with a muse, right? Because it's a muse and it's talks about gods. And this is something interesting, but I think that the muse is hyperlinked with creation of arts, the process of the creation of arts, where it seems to come from a surreal and hyperreal place. And at
Yeah,
the
I
same
think
time,
the Greeks
it's
would
also
agree. They had the cult of the muses, and there were several theories about art, but that it had divine origins was one of them.
you know, Pythagoras. I'm not sure if it was Pythagoras, but I think he was. It was. He used to actually have a cult, but I'm not sure if it was. But he used to be a cult leader.
Yeah, and Empedocles too. That was they style themselves as shamans, and there's a shamanic influence that it's believed to have been traced from Thrace, the northern part of Greece, through the Siberian shamans and through the pre-Socratics like Pythagoras and Empedocles, and it makes its way into Plato, and Plato transforms some of the shamanic concepts into things like the rational soul, rational contemplation. There's a good book by E.R. Dodds called The Greeks and the Irrational that traces that development
What do you think of?
and the occult self.
This is very interesting, but I think that actually math is a very very realistic thing. I think it's the most realistic thing to worship. Like it's the most realistic religion that Pythagoras created if they were worshiping math, because math is viewed as objectivity, and God is objectivity in its essence. And I think it also has its links with muses, because it's like where does the objectivity kind of come from, and where it's it's a surreal field, I suppose.
And they got a lot of their sense of order from observing the cosmos too, and the stars, and the patterns of the stars suggested a divine, stable, natural order that transcended human life.
Hmm.
So I guess we could end on that.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm sure there'll be more, and
Yeah, same.
until next time. Tomorrow we have PF. Oh, tonight I'm having my Zoom for gifted twice acceptable people. It's really an intellectual discussion Zoom. It's more of what we've already been doing. That's at 7 p.m. Central. If anyone's interested, you can contact me for the link. Primalhex, PRIMALHEX at Gmail or on Twitter. Tomorrow at, what is it, 9 a.m. Central is the PF Ewing morning show. You can come hang out with us there. And then we were thinking about maybe doing an after show on the Discord after that if you still wanted to.
Mm.
Tomorrow afternoon.
Yep.
So come hang out on the morning show and see what happens. We might take it to Discord when it's over. So if you need the link to that, contact me. And then I think that's everything coming up. And he streams again on Sunday mornings as well. So that's the weekend. And who knows when I'll be streaming next, but hopefully there'll be another interesting conversation for you. So Mert, thank you for coming on and
Thank you.
sharing all of your thoughts and ideas. And we'll do it again.
Yep.
Okay.